All right, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Zone 1 podcast. For those of you that don't know, the purpose of this podcast is to firstly provide support to activators, therapists, exercise professionals that has done our Be Activated workshops and use this work in their different businesses around the world, providing some extra support, some extra learning on the topic and some extra insights, hopefully, into different aspects of how we use this work. And then, secondly, it's also to create some interest with anyone new, anyone that is thinking about doing one of our workshops, giving them a bit of an understanding of what the work is about and what the possibilities is with what we can achieve with this work. So, in short, that's what we're going to be doing. From my side, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Karel Wildenboer. I have the privilege to work closely with Douglas Hill, the founder of this approach. And together we teach training workshops all over the world, really. We've started structuring the workshops a little bit differently from last year, where we now have a fundamentals workshop, which runs over 4 days, which is an introduction. Well, it's not an introduction, but it's the first sort of training workshop for therapists in order to teach them the basics of the work in depth. And then after that, we have a Beyond the Basics workshop, which is our old level 2 workshop, but with a lot of extra things into that. And we also now have an advanced workshop that Douglas presents, where Doug teaches new concepts, things we haven't taught before, things he hasn't taught before. And that's really exciting. And we hopefully be seeing more of those rolled out in this year. And also the idea would be to have our different levels of workshop presented in all the different locations where we teach so that people have the opportunity to grow in the work, learn more, and get better at what we're doing. So in short, that's what's coming. For a little bit of a summary of what's coming up in the next couple of months, I know Doug will be going to the US first in the next couple of months, followed by going to Indonesia, Jakarta again. And then there's a bit of a new venture of exploring opportunities into China. And after that, Doug will be coming to Australia again to teach with me in Melbourne. We're going to be having a workshop from the 2nd to the 5th of May, which is very exciting. It will be in Hawthorne. And I'll give you a bit more details about that at the end of the podcast. But as always, to start with, before I welcome our guest, I want to give you just a very short summary of what I see Be Activated as, and a little bit of understanding for those that are new and maybe joining us for the first time. So Be Activated is a evaluation and treatment system that was designed by Douglas Hill. And it is really all about identifying and correcting faulty breathing and movement patterns, which most people in modern life have. When we are able to, or let me go back a bit, these faulty patterns are typically underlying to what causes repetitive overload in the body and injuries and poor performance. So if we are able to identify these patterns and then correct them, then we can have a very immediate effect on performance, on speed, on agility, but also on improving the efficiency of movement without as much overload in the body. So it has a dramatic impact on injury prevention, is the one side of the work. Another side of the work is when we get people to breathe more efficiently, to move more correctly, it has a very big impact on our nervous system. It helps to get our nervous system in a more functional parasympathetic state where we are able to function optimally mentally. So this work both has an effect on our physical health, but also can have a dramatic effect on our clients' mental health. So in short, that's what it's about. And if you haven't heard about it before, I hope that sounds exciting. It's really a way of interacting with clients that can make a lasting difference and a way to make a significant difference in the lives of our clients. But before we go any further, let me welcome our guest today. So we have the owner of the Inner Athlete in Melbourne with us today, the very own Mr. Trent, and his surname I tried to practice beforehand on the pronunciation, but we'll go with Pirihi. And Trent, I've known for a number of years. He is a passionate exercise professional and coach and does some amazing work in their business. So welcome, Trent. It's really awesome to have you chatting with us tonight.
Cool. Thanks for having me on board.
Yeah, of course. So a little bit of background from my side about Trent first before we get into a few questions for him. Is Trent has got an exercise science background and a coaching background. And in his business, as far as my understanding, there's a lot of focus on working with elite level junior athletes and semi-professional athletes on an adult basis. So, Trent, maybe tell us a little bit about what is your business about? Maybe before we even talk about activations, what is it that you guys do? What is it you believe in? Just to give the listeners a bit of idea of who's speaking.
Yeah, Inner Athlete started be almost 7 years. So July will be 7 years. We're a semi-private training facility in the southeast suburbs of Melbourne. We primarily look after as youth athletes and semi-professionals, but we do go down the route of looking at like a lot of juniors and teens that just want to get generally fit and healthy, and we do have the odd adult coming in just to help rehab um, for various injuries as well. We also do look after some sporting teams, so we look after a swimming club, we look after a NPL team. We actually last year we started a lacrosse academy in partnership with someone else, and also have been doing a lot of work in the junior AFL space in the southeast with a Coates Talent League coach. So we're very much in that junior elite space, and personally, I've been doing it for almost 10 years from a personal perspective.
Awesome. Well, the it sounds like a lot, and it sounds like a busy practice. I know it keeps you very busy, and you guys do some amazing work. I want to come back to talking a bit about the youth later on because I think that's really the interesting side, maybe for our listeners, to what you guys do specifically. But I know that activations and the be activated approach has become a pivotal part of what you guys do at the Inner Athlete. Can you maybe give us just a general idea about why is it so important for you to use activations in your business? Um, what is the value that you see in that?
I think for me, when I first started doing it, working more as a personal trainer, I started to see immediate changes in the way that clients were moving in the gym. For me, that was a big thing. And for the clients to actually report back on that. So whether that we do a simple test beforehand, whether it's like a sit to stand or a squat to a box, and going through one or two activation points, and they actually describe about it almost feels like less restrictive or it's easier to move. We we're like, okay, there is something to this when I first initially started. But for the business at the moment, we actually include it as part of our assessment tool. So we actually go through the screening process to understand what their pattern is specifically. And this usually links to the conversation that we had beforehand, just asking simple questions. What sports do you play? Maybe position specific. So if it's for like baseball, and then going into injury history, and then the pattern, understanding what their cheat pattern or the cheat code is in order to move in a powerful manner. When we better understand that, we can actually find ways to unlock that so that's no longer an issue. So when they are performing under fatigue, or as you said before, that these athletes always have these reoccurring patterns and they can't understand why that is the case. And you can strengthen an ankle till the cows come home, but at the end of the day, it just takes more force and they're still exposed to the same issue moving forward.
If I can jump in, I mean, maybe for those listening that has not got a lot of experience with the work, is if we talk about patterns, is one of the things that we do with Be Activators, we test and look to identify a client's faulty movement pattern. And what that simply means is the way we initiate movement. So some clients will move by initiating their movement from their upper body, meaning their shoulders, their neck, their jaw always has to be tensed in order for them to initiate any movement. And those clients will then typically get overload in those parts of their body and break down. And that's typically the recurrent injuries that you see with clients will always be linked to their patterns. So some guys will have patterns that overloads the lower legs, and they will be the guys that have your recurrent calf injuries and your Achilles tendinopathies and your plantar fasciitis, etc. So, Trent, you say you guys identify those patterns in your initial assessment of clients. What I'd love to to chat about that is what do you think the value is for the client to, I mean, obviously for the trainer to understand their pattern helps you guys to train them. It helps you guys to know what to look out for. But what do you think is the value for clients to understand their pattern?
Um, it's quite interesting because it depends on what their pattern is. I find the ones that have neck, shoulder issues are the ones that are actually probably more interesting because usually they're the ones that tend to run out of breath, and they're usually I see them in the swimmers. I tend to see them um, in specific sports. So for swimmers, usually it's the upper body tends to be the cheek pattern. Usually it's either the neck or the arm specifically. For soccer players, it tends to be it's either the quad, the tibialis, or the foot. So for me, it actually provides a lot more value to understand how they move. And then when we go onto the gym floor, maybe we do some movement assessments afterwards. It gets me to understand, all right, where the cheek pattern is. And then if I take that away for doing the actual movement screen, then they can better understand, okay, this is what you use to help stabilize the system whilst performing the movement. And then also when we do a running gait analysis, we can actually find out why are they, heavy heel strikers. Why are they moving in a specific fashion, even if it's on one side as well. So there might be normal midfoot strike on the right side, but there might be a heavy heel striker on the left side in their running gait.
Yeah, and often you can find that when we do pattern testing, that there's asymmetry with that, where people will have a different pattern on the one side versus the other side, and that will also influence the things that you've just described. Something that I think has a lot of value for athletes and for everyday people. This is not just for athletes. Is just understanding why these things keep happening to their body. I think athletes often can be a real. You have the same basketball player doing the same training with the same coach, but the one will develop chronic Achilles tendon problems, and the other one would have issues with hip or with their knee. And for athletes to understand why that is that happens, I think is important. You can only take charge of your body's injuries or problems if you understand it. I think that's really important for clients if they have the understanding as to this is why I keep having these ankle issues. Then it's much easier for them, I think, to commit to changing it through activations, but also changing it through rehab, specialized training you guys do. It serves as a motivation, I think, to clients if they understand why it is they need to do that.
Yeah, and now working with soccer, we have the same girls that used to come up to us asking for a rub through their calves because the calves are always tight. So more than likely, they're going to be a leg driver in that case. So when we go through the activation pattern with them and get them to understand that and go through the self-activations, it becomes less of an issue moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean that's I think probably just touching on I think what goes wrong with a lot of what we sometimes do in healthcare is a lot of the stuff that we do becomes quite symptomatic. That client that comes in with the chronic tension in their calves, and some of you listening might recognize these things in yourselves. You may have areas that are always tight, and areas that you always have to go to the gym beforehand and foam roll before you train. But it doesn't matter how many times the calves are rubbed or how many times we foam rolling our ITB or our glutes or whatever it is for you, it seems to always be tight. And there's a reason for that. I mean, and that's really what this work is about, is that if someone's movement pattern that is faulty is underlying to what's constantly causing that tightness and tension, then just relieving the tension with whatever means it is, strapping, stretching, foam rolling, whatever it is, needling, will help. But it always returns to being tight again because we actually haven't addressed the cause. So if we can identify the pattern, like you mentioned, get those clients to understand it and correct that, then suddenly all those other modalities, which definitely has value, but suddenly has much more of a lasting effect. And we find, as you say, we may need to rub those calves a little bit less because they're actually not tightening chronically as much anymore.
Mm.
I had a client in the last 2 weeks, which was very interesting. A young and I mean, this ties in with probably your type of clients, a young boy of about 13 that's developed some, was had not developed, he's for years had chronic pain in his calves and chronic pain in his feet when he plays basketball. And he's quite a good basketball player, sort of invited to at sort of state level trials, and he's sort of there and there and about. But he is really limited, and if he plays every game, he gets severe pain in his calves, severe pain, and he's had orthotics made for him. He's had various types of rehab done. And when we tested him, of course, he had what we call a 3-3-3 leg pattern on both sides, which just means when he runs, he initiates his movement by tensing the lower legs. And that is really what's causing that rigidity and that load through his feet. And because he doesn't have length in his calves, his feet constantly gets overstretched because he has to create that mobility from somewhere. So he's developing like strain on his plantar fascia and things like that. And I was, again, I'm often amazed with this work, as we did 3 or 4 sessions with him. I saw him yesterday, and it's a month later. We gave it about a month after the initial work. And I've seen him now a month later, and his symptoms have resolved completely, where he has no more pain in his feet. He has no more pain in his calves. And, for a young man moving forward in whatever his sport will be, if it's, just a serious social thing for you, if you would move on to higher levels of sport, I think I love the idea of, creating opportunity for him to be able to really excel at what he does without something like that limiting him. And if we look at the body differently, there's a lot more opportunity in doing that.
Mm.
So if we can maybe just go to when I've known you now for a couple of years, and you've always been a really big advocate of Be Activated. You've invited me on a number of occasions to your gym facility to come and do some presentations for your staff, but also there's always a whole heap of young interns involved to come and have a look. More recently, I had the privilege to work with your staff and do a half-day training workshop on the basics of Be Activated, pattern testing, self-activations, and a little bit of understanding of what it's about. So my question to you is, Trent, why do you, it's clear that you see this as a really important thing that you want to expose not only your staff to, but also other juniors in your field. Why do you see this as such an important thing to educate people on and make people aware of?
Yeah, I think it kind of stems back to my time in the US. So I did an internship at the University of Wisconsin, and then the S&C coach for the men's hockey team, the men's and women's hockey team at the time, Jim Schneider, he was working on one of his athletes on the table at the time, and he's coming back from an injury, he had some sort of restrictions, and all I saw, this guy was in absolute agony on the table. Like, he was only using his thumb and, a couple of fingers just moving the tissue around. Like, he was like almost like a fish out of water. That's how bad it was. Anyways, he tested his hamstrings, and I'm like, his hamstrings went from like 45 degrees to like 110 degrees in like 15 minutes. And I was just like, what the hell is this? How does the hamstring tension reduce so much that the athlete now has this this access to this range of motion where he didn't have that, 15 minutes ago? And then he went to go to explain it to me. I couldn't understand it because he's a bit of a mad professor. And then he got me into looking into Doug. So he did RPR, which is kind of like the US version of Be Activated. And that's kind of how I landed in the course. But for me, it was like, I've always had issues. I've had injuries throughout my whole career, playing rugby league and up in various other sports as a junior. Went to physios. My mum used to go, they sent me to physio, used to get, personal training, to strengthen up and all that jazz. But there never was really a way to kind of like help unlock performance. I felt like I had a lot more to give. And for me to see an athlete change that much, it was just like, well, if he did that in 15 minutes, imagine what he would do over someone's career. Or that's kind of like where my thinking went. It's like, what if? And that's where I kind of landed on doing the course in 2017. I think that's when I first met you when I was in Sydney as well. And I've kind of just stuck to it the whole thing. I came with an open mind, didn't know what to expect, what it was about. But for me, it started to make more sense of how the psychology affects the physiology, physiology affects the psychology. If we have a positive influence on the autonomic nervous system, so being able to go from a sympathetic state to more of a parasympathetic state, like that rest and restore, that's where performance really lies, where we have selective attention on the tasks that we want to have. Right? We're no longer functioning in a state of fear. We're functioning in a state of performance. And obviously, going through sports science, they talk about the arousal bell curve, which kind of explains it, but not to a very good degree. To me, it made sense of we wanted to make sure that the best athletes are the ones that are the most calm, the most relaxed. They're the ones that can recover well in between their sets and sessions. They're the ones that can go from a high arousal state to a real low arousal state. They're the ones that can. The best way I put it with my soccer girls, I just did an experiment with them. So we were doing interval sprints, 30 meters on a 30-second cycle. They had to complete within 6 seconds. So very more lactate. They had to do 10 sets and they had a 3-minute rest. During that 3-minute rest, the last minute of the 3-minute rest, I got them to do just a quick zone 1 activation as a group. And they actually said they actually felt faster.
Yeah.
So to me, it's just like the reason why I have so much buy-in, because I've seen it happen in so many different settings. I just test and in different settings and see how it goes. And that's my mentality has been. It's like, I just want to see how it goes. And that's how I kind of create the buy-in with the athletes. It's like, look, let's just see if you start to feel different with less restriction. If we don't, that's fine. If we do, great. Then we can continue to move forward. So I don't set much expectations for them. If they feel better, we roll with it. If they don't, we move on with it. But I've never had like an athlete's like, I don't feel better.
Yeah, the interesting thing for me is I always tell the problem with this work more often. I seldom find that I struggle to get athletes on board with this work. And it's just as you said, you don't need to convince them. In fact, I think that's the wrong way to go about trying to tell someone how amazing this is and he's going to get all these great results. The way to do it is simply athletes know their bodies, they know what they feel like. And if we do some work on them, give them something to compare before and after, and let them feel. And generally, athletes can immediately feel the change in their body. Sometimes it's very measurable, as you've seen where they faster, and with guys working with measurable stuff like gym work. There's often an immediate difference in their ability to lift more or whatever it is they're doing. But they generally feel it easily, and once that's the case, I find if they feel quicker, faster, stronger, they're immediately on board with what we're doing with them. We can typically tell them anything to do, and they'd be happy to do it as long as they feel those results. And that is really the beauty of how this work is done. Yeah.
The other part that I like is it doesn't require any tools.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest hurdle when it comes to like the physiotherapy side with your more allied health is a lot of physios will prescribe, oh, you need this equipment or you need this piece, or like the activations is like we've done a video on what to do self activations and we teach our members to do it on themselves. So they understand what to feel for, what the tissue should feel under the fingers. And that actually creates more buy-in. So they can just do it automatically. So whether they're on the bench, we do it like I do it with my soccer girls. We do it as part of our warm-up routine now. I know Cal Dietz has released what he did with the US women's hockey team as well as part of his warm-up routine, which is really cool to see. It's like, to me, it just makes total sense. And it actually helps to speed up the warm-up process as well, which is good.
Well, yeah. Well, if we can do an activation and get someone's hamstring to immediately be more flexible, then we've done half of what we were maybe aiming to do with a warm up in any which way. So what I like about what you mentioned there was it really empowers clients. When we can when I think there's two things I wanted to lift out there. Is the first was you make it simple. So by meaning we don't need tools. You can activate anywhere. I always tell my clients anywhere and everywhere. It could be in your bed in the morning before you get up for work. It could be next to the track before you're doing your track work session as an athlete, next to the field, in the change room, in the car. And really, that's what I encourage my clients to do, because then suddenly your compliancy with your clients is a lot easier. If they don't need to have tools, then they can do it. As long as they have their hands, they can do it wherever they are. And that way, you have a much better chance of your clients actually doing it. When we complicate things, I think in general, in therapy, in maybe in training as well, if you really go and look at the statistics of compliancy of clients doing the homework therapists give them to do, it's very poor. And if you add complexity to that, meaning they need a device, they now need to have their foam roller with them or a spiky ball or whatever. Now suddenly it can only happen in certain environments that have that with them. And then very quickly the compliance gets a lot less. So keeping it simple, teaching them to do it with their hands is what I would suggest to you guys listening out there. People always ask, but can I use a spiky ball? Can I use this? Of course you can. But it's definitely not the way I teach people to do it, because I want them to have the simplest way to do it that they can do it, that all they require is to have themselves present. They don't need anything else. It could be anywhere, because that way we get a lot more compliance and they can do it more often. Can they sometimes use some other structures with it? By all means, but I don't teach that as the ideal way to do it, because then it becomes quite limiting. And the other thing that you mentioned, I like that it's about just, if we teach clients to do this themselves, we give them ability to do it easily. What we're really doing is we're empowering them to take control of their own health. And I think that's something that's really important for me as a therapist is, can we make a difference in clients' lives that they don't need us so much anymore? I think that should almost always be the goal. If we can work with someone where they are able to maintain their own health better, I think that's really what our goal should be as therapists, as trainers, as health workers in general. And that type of principle that you're implementing, I think, achieves exactly that. So that sounds good. Something else you touched on that I'd love to have a bit of a chat about is you talked about how activations lowers the state of our nervous system. So for those of you listening that may not understand what we're talking about here, but there's a constant correlation between what happens physically in the body and what we see in someone's nervous system. So when your nervous system is in heightened state, stressed, anxious states, our body physically responds to that. We start breathing differently, we start moving differently, and the two constantly go together. So part of what we do with activations is we do physical releases on the body, which takes away the restrictions in the body that limits your brain in its ability to breathe and move correctly. So once we correct that, though, as soon as we restore breathing and movement, it has an immediate impact on the nervous system, and then lowering the nervous system to a more relaxed, or as you mentioned, parasympathetic state, where performance lies. Where, when you know that better than me, but when athletes tell you about that amazing day when they broke the record, is when they were just in this quiet space, some refer to it as a zone or a flow state or whatever we want to do. That side of the work for me is particularly interesting, and I think there's a big role to play there, particularly with young athletes. And I'd love to get your opinion on that. There's almost, I call it there's really a pandemic these days in young people, not just young athletes, but of stress and of anxiety and this type of work, along with obviously exercise that you guys do, I think can have a massive impact. Is this something that you come across often with the young people you work with?
I actually got an example.
How do you guys work with it?
Yeah, I have an example. I was at a swim meet. This was probably, I think it was about this time last year. I think it was Sprint States. It might have been a little bit before then. So for the swim club that I work with, there was a whole bunch of them that were in the final. I think it was about 5 or 6 of them, which was good for the club. But there was there was a delay in the race, and one of the girls I had been doing activation treatments with. because she was struggling with, I think it was with lower back and some shoulder issues, which is probably another topic for another day. Anyways, when there was a delay in the race, usually when people are standing behind the blocks, obviously you can start to overthink. Now she was 13 at the time, and a lot of 13-year-old girls can go through the state of either overthinking or their focus just drifts completely. So be one or the other. So what I said to her, I just made mention, just go through the activation series. What I've taught you, just go through it. Standing behind the blocks. Some people are kind of like trying to keep themselves preoccupied and trying to keep them in that state. And then for her, it was more just being relaxed. Now she was in lane 8 as well. So qualifying time, not the best, but it was probably like maybe the 8th best, 9th best for the race. Anyway, so the race starts. She gets off pretty well. I was like, okay, she's going to probably end up top 3 at this rate. And then as the race goes on, I was like, all right, she's getting really close. She's like at the top at this rate by 10 meters to go. And then she ended up coming first.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and she was super happy, super ecstatic. And this was a race that she qualified like an 8th fastest for. And to me, it was like, it almost kind of like lets you settle. And when stress in your world, or say it's a delay in the race or things that are unforeseen, you kind of like, you start to relax. And she did a couple of jumps just to kind of get her body to become a bit more like twitchy and responsive because of that lack of that big chunk of time. And like, to me, that was like a perfect example of, being able to have the body in a nice relaxed state and calm, and then the muscles are going to be able to fire and also be able to contract and relax a lot more rapidly than if she just stood there more in a stressed out state. Because we know if you're in a stressed out state, your muscles kind of like almost feel like they're locked up.
Yeah.
And it's almost like riding a bike with the handbrake on, with the brakes on.
I always, and this is honestly just in my head how I see it, but if we, in order to have that explosive strength, it can't come from a place where we're already half tight. We're already half loaded, and that's really what happens when we're stressed, when we're anxious. We're already loading, and now we want to try and get a maximal, effort from the muscles from there. What I want with athletes, I want them to have the ability to be in a completely relaxed state, so that from there they can accelerate into a maximal state. But if you're always stuck in a semi-loaded state, then that affects your ability. And some people can still perform well like that, but it comes at a price eventually, sometimes performance-wise, other times injury-wise. So yeah, that sounds, it's amazing what can happen if we just implement some small changes to a routine of an athlete. I mean, I'll often have clients that struggle with, for me, I see it with the golfers that I work with that might, struggle with their golf or go through a patch where they're battling to hit the ball off the tee, and then for them, I'll get them to bring some activation principle into their routine to disrupt them. Because if you've hit the ball, if you've done 10 of the last tee shots off the box and put them all, into the bush, then the 11th one, your body is expecting to do that. And we're walking onto that box with anxiety of that. So we want to almost do something as soon as they get a bit more anxious about that to disrupt that system, lower the state of the nervous system, and then go up and then start changing that response in the body. And that can happen instantly, sometimes with a short activation session like you've had your client do, and other times with as simple as doing a few correct breaths before activity, just to reset your nervous system into the right place. So, yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise you just reinforce the pattern at the end of the day and it just becomes harder and harder.
Well, that's exactly it. Yeah, and that's exactly that. It's reinforcing, and that's what happens. So when we talk about movement patterns, often our clients have no idea that they have a faulty movement pattern. They've been using it so long, it just feels normal to them. This is how they move. And they don't know until we start changing that pattern. And that's maybe something to touch on, which I always try and explain to people in the exercise world, is that we all train, and I'm sure you were trained originally the same as me, but as long as we train the muscles correctly, the people are in the best position, the best form for exercises, then we will get good results. But the reality is is different to that. We can do everything perfect with someone and still not get, for instance, their glute engaging really well and not get good results with their glutes. And that's because if their pattern is such that they don't engage their glutes in that activity, then the exercise on its own doesn't always change. And we need to first do something to disrupt that pattern and then train them so that they not repeating the pattern when they're training, because that's often what you said now, what people will do. And they just then strengthen the pattern. And then they get stronger, but they don't get stronger in a more normal pattern, but typically in the overload pattern, which eventually leads to less performance, but also breakdown.
Yeah, it's like you might like I've had swimmers in the past where they have lower back issues. So whether it's from breaststroke, usually it's from breaststroke actually, and then it's like, oh, you got to strengthen your lower back because you're getting pain in your lower back, and it's like all you're really doing is just reinforcing the pattern at the end of the day. So for me, it's like, no, we need to actually almost like unlock the one's ability to actually breathe first, and then usually to actually find more capacity, more range of motion, and less restriction through the lower back.
Yeah. It's then suddenly easy to achieve. What we do with activations essentially is we take away restrictions that the body has formed in order to use certain compensation strategies. And as soon as you remove it, your brain has this amazing ability of adjusting, which is why we see, sometimes crazy results, like the first day that you just said. When you see that for the first time and someone's hamstring goes from a 40 to a 90 degrees in a few minutes, it's a bit mind-boggling. It looks sometimes like, like it's impossible, but your nervous system has got this amazing ability to adjust. And as soon as we take away those restrictions, it changes and it goes back almost to returning to default. And as soon as that happens, the body's got the ability to change instantly. And that's really why we see such quick results with this work. But that's only part of it. And then once you have that shift, then what you guys do, training someone in the correct way with the correct strategies, suddenly becomes heaps more effective, and I think that's what I want people to take away from our conversation tonight as well, is that activations does not replace the importance of exercise, fitness, training, strength, but it enhances that. If we bring that into the process, then suddenly your results with achieving what you're trying to achieve as an exercise professional is just a lot more likely to be achieved and better.
Yeah, and I'll say personally for me, like I use activations as part of my gym routine. So I'll go through zone 1 and might do like zone 2 or zone 3, depending on if I'm feeling some sort of restrictions. And then I'll go through some movements and some hand-eye coordination work. If I know if I'm going to do a heavy lift for the day or something like that, I will actually pick a point and then smash that point, do a couple of breaths, and then go do the set. And 9 times out of 10, well, actually, every single time, actually, I've been able to successfully do it with good technique, good posture, and able just to breathe through it as well. And that's probably the other thing with the gym stuff that I don't think anyone really mentions is when we exercise, we should actually be breathing through the exercise as well and having it more separate to movement. And I find that when people synchronize it up, we rely on holding our breath to create that bracing sensation in order to help us drive. Now, as Doug has mentioned before, he's worked with J.L. Holsworth over in the US, where that can be handy when you're going like super maximal lifts, but when you're doing sub-max work, you should be able to just generally breathe throughout the exercise.
Yeah, we like to sort of always say that if to have true control, let's just say to be able to engage, as an example, your glutes fully, we need to be able to do that whilst breathing. Then so it's one of the ways we'll progress work when we do work with clients as well as, sure, they can hold with a lot of strength. Can they hold if we add some complexity, like making them breathe with it? Because that then is a next level of control. So I like that you touched on the breathing, because I think that's something that's neglected dramatically in all sorts of fields, therapy, but definitely in training. I tell my clients, besides the self activations they need to do in the gym, really important to come back to breathing all the time. In between the stuff they do as part of recovery after a heavy set, the quicker we can get back into a good diaphragmatic breathing pattern, the quicker they recover, and the more it keeps them in zone one, which means the next thing they do, they're still firing a good sequence and probably doing it better. And as you say, if they can incorporate that whilst training with, and it's not possible with all types of exercise, but with certain exercises, then there's even more value in that. And that's something I think that for those of you listening at home, a simple thing that you can implement with all of your clients is bringing breathing in a lot more with what they're doing. And it doesn't have to be in sport. It's also just in everyday life, because what happens when we're breathing in a correct sequence, what we're essentially doing is your diaphragm has got really close links into your psoas. And as soon as we engage our diaphragm correctly, it has an immediate effect on engaging your psoas and your glutes more correctly, which means zone one pretty much comes alive. So we can reinforce that zone one by doing regular breaths. And then the other side to what me and Trent touched on earlier is if we get someone in a better sequence, then there's this mental shift. And it has a huge impact on our mental state. So if we can get someone to breathe from zone one, that's the way we breathe when we're safe, when we in a relaxed state, then it has an immediate effect on calming the nervous system, helping them be in that performance state if it's an athlete, or helping someone to be in that clear space where they can take decisions as a leader, as a business owner, as a whatever it is in your life, giving someone clarity to perform at a higher level mentally. And I think, Trent, if I can bring you in here with something that I loved when I had a look at your website, just to think of about what sort of things we'll chat around before. And one of the things you mentioned on there that you try and achieve with young athletes is you talk about training them, obviously, injury prevention, and then you mentioned confidence building. And I wanted to just touch on that. I thought it's a beautiful thing that you do, and I've heard you talk about this before and about mentoring young people and really helping building them up, not just as swimmers, as soccer players, but as people, as kids, and helping them, I guess, feel a bit safer in this world. I mean, what is it that how do you look at that?
Yeah, I think when I'm working with the junior athletes, even semi-professional athletes as well, whether they want to stay semi-professional or go into other things, is like we need to focus on developing the human first and the athlete second. And it's always been the mantra behind it. Some of the best coaches I've been mentored by follow the same concept of philosophy as well. We need to develop great humans in order to become great athletes. I think we always hear about talent that falls by the wayside. They've been able to get so far, but psychologically they can't make it. They just can't get over that hump. They can't get over that bridge. And you look at like players like Novak Djokovic, his resiliency, injuries and all the dramas that he's had over the last couple of years, for some people that would have stopped, but for him, his mentality is such a big thing. But coming back to juniors, I think that one of the biggest things when it comes to working with junior athletes and even just teens in general is allowing them to become more, to develop competence, you have to develop competency. They need to become competent in the tasks over time in order to feel more confident to take more things on. But the first step to that is we got to put them in a position to be courageous or have that courage in order to make themselves vulnerable in order to start to work on the task that they're not competent at. And over time, we provide opportunities to develop that in order to become more confident in their own ability. Brother and sister for about 2 years now, so they come and train with us twice a week. I've changed the training every 3 to 6 months and incorporating different movement patterns, and especially for one of the kids, he really does struggle with facing new challenges, or he doesn't like doing different sports. And I was like, okay, what I've been doing is challenging him with different drills or exercises. So one of the drills that we do is with two tennis balls, you throw against the wall, but you got to throw one and then catch the same one and then swap. He definitely was not confident at that. And he's like, oh, just like a long face. I'm just like, look, I just want you to get 4, 2 in each hand. Okay. And we move on to the next task straight away. So I don't give him too much time to dwell on it. And then next week we'll say, okay, let's do 6. You did 4 last week. Let's go 2 more. And then I just rinse and repeat that process. And then when he got up to 10, what I want you to do, you're going to throw both of them at the same time and catch them at the same time. And you get that same look again. And it's like, oh. And then we just give me 2. It takes him quite a while to get it, but then he gets it. Okay, we move on to the next task that he's competent with. And then we increase it to 4. Well, he did 2. It's really just 2 more. And we go to 4. And it's just if you think about it, it's just progressive overload if you're an exercise professional. So it's the same way of building someone's ability to improve their endurance. You just increase a rep on a weekly basis. In this case, we built it by 2 each time as well. And what that does is it actually starts to build that confidence that they're actually able to do more. But they don't realize what I'm actually doing is I'm actually increasing the complexity over a long period of time.
Yeah.
So then when they go to do their sport, now he's really enjoying tennis. So for a sport like tennis, you've got to have your hand-eye coordination's got to be pretty decent. So and he's loving tennis at the moment. So he's winning a few games at school. School competitions, and they're both various schools on a weekly basis. So we're starting to see him pick up a little bit more. But it's also a maturity thing as well. Like he's only 12 years old, so that will progress over time.
Look, I think as I touched on earlier, a big problem in the modern day is that we have so many kids that struggle with diagnoses like anxiety or these type of problems, and it starts at a young age, and they really carry that often through. I see these people all the way through into adulthood by the time we treat them, and it's had a dramatic impact on their life, often in very negative ways. So if one can influence young people early on in their life, what I love about that is it can dramatically change the outcome of big things in their life. Firstly, obviously, their sporting performance, but more than that, as people in this world, if we can get young people to feel safe in their own body, because that's really what it's about. When we're anxious, it's got to do with the nervous system being in an overwhelmed state all the time, and then suddenly everything is scary. Things that we know shouldn't be scary are still scary. Things we shouldn't be worrying about, we worry about, even if we know we shouldn't be worrying about, because our physiology feels threatened and unsafe. So what I love about the work that I do is if we can teach a young person some simple principles, and it really could be simple stuff, just like what you're doing with the training. It doesn't have to be rocket science type of exercises, but simple stuff from an activation point of view. As simple as, can we teach a young person how to release their diaphragm by rubbing on the edge of their ribs, up their sternum, and teach them how to take a few correct breaths, and teach them the value of it. Let them feel the difference in their body when they do it. Hopefully let them feel the difference in how they feel, because that gets him into his body. Suddenly the world doesn't feel like such a scary place out there. And then that ties in with everything you guys are doing. Once we have that type of confidence of feeling okay within my own body, then setting these challenges and the more likely to achieve those challenges with physical activity becomes a lot more likely and less stressful to achieve. So I think, for us, and for those of you listening, don't underestimate the role that we can play in people's lives going forward, from a sports performance point of view, from an injury prevention point of view, but from a life point of view. If we can get someone to learn to regulate their nervous system through feeling safer, through developing confidence, like with the training that you guys do with these kids, we can create adults that are safe in the world, adults that are able to take better decisions on the world, adults that can step into leadership positions and really have a positive effect on the world, adults that become parents that have a more positive effect on their kids in the future. And I really think that's where the value lies in what we do as therapists, as exercise professionals, in the work that we do. That's really cool. Trent, I want to finish with one last question for you. What would your advice be for someone, let's just say in the exercise, training, sports environment, professional like yourself, who maybe has done training with us, and wants to implement this into their world. Sometimes people just struggle with, how do I start? Where do I even, how do I make this part of what I do? Because it's not the norm. What advice do you got for someone starting out with this work?
Uh, Good question. Would I think sometimes the road to success has already been paved by someone else. So what I mean by that is actually talking to other people that already are in the industry. Fortunately enough, when I did the course in 2017, I actually knew people that were there because it's actually a small world when you really look at it. Like, if you look in your suburb within a 10-kilometer radius, someone's done the course and they do the course and you catch up with them
Yeah.
and they've been doing it for years and years and years, you're going to be able to just pick their brain. And I think that's probably the path of least resistance because you're not actually working on your client. You get a bit of an idea on how you can actually implement it moving forward. In terms of what I did, I just said to my clients, can we try something? Can we not try? Can we do something different? I don't know how it's going to go, but we can see and we can find out together. So whether it's zone one, I just test the hamstrings, zone one, or do a sit to stand, or straight leg, reaching for the toes with straight legs, or doing some sort of activity that they normally do, and then do the intervention, and then reassess, and then they're done. And
What,
then does it?
what I hear you saying, if I can paraphrase it a bit, is you're not trying to convince them. You're just letting them feel the difference. And I think that's very good advice, especially for people in the sport field. It's easy when they feel the difference. You don't have to have all the fancy words of explaining it always if your client can feel the difference. For athletes, most of the time, if they feel different, they're on board. They don't always need to understand as much. Us as therapists, we want all the explanations behind it so much, but for athletes, they really need to feel it. So I like that. That's a simple way of looking at it.
I think athletes are more like they're pretty simple at the end of the day. Is this going to help me or not? If it's not going to help me, we throw it away. If it's going to help me improve, then great. I'm and then do more. And then later on down the track, they're going to ask questions is like, why is this actually happening? And then the education can come in. So they're meeting you halfway at that point,
Yeah.
rather than you trying to pull them along, and then you get this pushback. And it's like I had a girl this morning. She came in. She's doing a trial with us, so she's done the assessment. We know what her pattern is. So what we did is we just went through zone one, but each time I said, reach leg straight, reach for your toes. Let me know how it feels. Take a mental note how it feels. And then some areas were actually a lot better than others in terms of how she was feeling. And her mum was there as well, and she actually reported that she was moving better as well
Yeah.
after the fact, not before the fact.
Yeah.
And that created the buy-in. It's like, okay, cool. Now we just move on to the next exercise. We don't spend not a long any time talking about it. When we go through the consultation process and when they're built more trust with the athlete and they ask more questions like, why do we do this every time we come in? And it's like, then we have a license to actually explain to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like that. You've already got the belief. Then it's easy. We're not selling now. We're just explaining what it's about. And because I think that's where, a lot of people do go wrong is trying to sell because we see this amazing results. We want to try and tell people about this is so awesome and you're going to be so much stronger and you're going to be so much faster. But that's really not the way to go about it. It's just let them feel. Let's see, this is what I've learned. I've seen some great results with myself, maybe with some clients. Can we try it? And let's see how this works with you. And then you give me some feedback on that. And that, I think, is the best way. Once they give you that positive feedback, then they're on board. And from there, I like how you approach it. Then you educate them. Then from there, you explain to them why this works, why we're repeating the activations every time before we train, etc. And then you really build a deeper understanding and probably a lot more commitment from your client long term and continuing with it. So yeah.
Great. And then the best part is I actually showed them footage of professional athletes doing it pre-game or in-game.
Yeah.
Like some of the Major League Baseballers, they'll do it in-game. I've seen video footage of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I was on the news, US, And then I think there was a practitioner at the last Games as well for Team
There was,
England.
yeah. There
Yeah,
was some
and
athletes
they
doing
just put a video
activations.
footage up
Yeah,
of a top level swimmer doing it. I think it was pre-race, yeah, or pre-warm up, I should say.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so it's been done on a larger scale, and they just like,
Yeah.
oh, and they kind of almost, it's not like it's just this thing. It's like it's a thing.
Yeah, and it is definitely we definitely seeing things being used on a larger scale more. We definitely, from my and Doug's side, hoping to see more and more of that as we're moving forward, and that's really why we teach. That's why we try and build to the teaching. From my side, I want to thank you for guys like you, Trent, that really do a lot of work in educating people about this work. And I know personally how many people you expose to the work, and I want to say thank you to you for that what you do, and also just for the work you guys do in our youth. I love it. I think it's important. It's fun to work with high level athletes and Olympians, but I think the real value lies in if we can change young people's lives and change the trajectory of their lives, both in their sport and also in their life. I really think that's what would we say? It is a good cause to work in, and I love that that's your passion, and I've seen how you guys do that. It's inspiring. So for those of you guys listening, if this is something you're interested in, then Trent is someone to have a chat to. We're gonna be there'll be details on the posts where you'll find these podcasts. Go and have a look at Trent's website. Reach out to Trent if it's a field that you're interested to getting more involved in. Reach out to me on that point, on the topics we discussed today. If you guys have any questions, please post them on the social media platforms where we're going to be advertising this podcast. Ask your questions there, come back, and between me and Trent, we will answer those questions as best we can. And let's learn together and see if we can get more people doing better work out there and helping you take the work in your clinic, in your gym environment to the next level. Trent, I thank you for your time. It's been super interesting having a chat to you. I appreciate it, and looking forward to doing more things together moving forward. We're going to leave it at that so that it's not too long for everyone. And I'm just going to give you guys to finish with a little rundown of what to expect for our workshop in Melbourne coming up. I'll do that in a second. All right, guys. So just lastly, what's coming up in the next couple of months. So from my side, I'm looking forward to traveling to Indonesia to go and assist Doug with a fundamentals workshop. We will be presenting there from the 16th to the 19th of April. Thereafter, we would be back in Melbourne, and we've decided to change that workshop from the 2nd to the 5th of May to a once-off advanced workshop. This is going to be super exciting. 4 days to get into the deeper sides of Doug's mind. And Doug will be teaching concepts there that he has not taught before, new concepts, things that run parallel to be activated. We're also going to be looking at some familiar concepts and diving deeper into those concepts. We're going to be looking at a prototype that Doug has for an activation tool, which is really exciting. We're going to be looking at movement and exercise integration with activations. We're also going to be looking at a problem list of those that attend and going through solving those problems, helping you guys to be better practitioners. This workshop is for practitioners that are comfortable with the basic activation work. This is not for newcomers. This is the next level. And I'm really excited because this is all new stuff also for me. So then after that, we will have a fundamentals workshop later on in this year in Australia, most likely in Melbourne. So have a look out. I'll have those dates out soon for those of you that have missed out and are looking forward to trying the fundamentals workshop. It will be coming. So guys, that's it for me for now. Thank you for joining us. Looking forward to chatting to you again on our next podcast, and reach out directly to me if you've got any questions on what is coming up workshop wise. Also, if you have any questions, comments on this podcast for me, for Trent, please post those online once you see this advertised, and we will answer you in that space. Take care out there and see you soon.